The cabin stood alone, weathered by the elements, its walls steeped in silence and secrets. Torreon, New Mexico, a small, unassuming community nestled in the Manzano Mountains, was a place of rustic isolation, where people kept to themselves and visitors were rare. The quiet of the winter landscape was only disturbed by the distant howling of coyotes and the occasional crunch of footsteps on the frozen ground. But in December of 1996, the silence of Torreon was shattered by a crime so gruesome that it would haunt the town for decades to come. Cassandra Cedillo, 23, had hoped to find peace in the solitude of the cabin she shared with her 17-year-old boyfriend, Ben Anaya. Life had not been easy for her. As a young mother of 2 little boys, she had known struggle, heartbreak, and the weight of responsibility. The cabin was supposed to be a refuge, a place to start anew. That December, the high desert landscape was blanketed with frost, and the chill in the air made the cabin feel even more remote. But Cassandra and Ben, despite their challenges, had hope. She wanted to create a safe haven for her sons, just 3 and 4 years old, away from the hardships of the city. But someone had other plans. The attack came in the dead of night, a time when darkness feels most menacing. The cabin's wooden door shuddered under the force of heavy blows before it burst open. The small home was suddenly filled with figures. For men, their breath steaming in the frigid air, their hands clutching weapons that gleamed in the dim light. Cassandra and Ben awoke to confusion, the tranquility of sleep giving way to sheer panic. Gunfire exploded, ripping through the fragile silence. Bullets tore through flesh and bone. Cassandra never had a chance to protect her children, nor did Ben have time to react. Within moments, their young bodies lay motionless on the cold wooden floor, blood pooling beneath them. The invaders loomed over the gruesome scene, their heavy boots scuffing the worn planks as they moved through the cabin. Then silence. In the chaos, 2 small figures huddled together in a corner, their wide eyes glistening with fear. Cassandra's sons had seen everything. Their tiny hands trembled as they clutched at each other, but the killers didn't strike them down. Perhaps it was oversight. Perhaps it was intentional. The men left, closing the door behind them, leaving the 2 children alone with the lifeless bodies of their mother and Ben. What followed was a slow, unimaginable horror. For days, then weeks, the boys survived in the only way they knew how. With no food, no warmth, and no help, they must have cried, called out for their mother, waited for her to wake up. But the cabin was isolated, the snow-covered roads impassable, and no one came. Eventually, the children succumbed, not to violence, but to starvation and dehydration. A slow, agonizing end, all alone in the desolate wilderness. It wasn't until April 1997, months after the brutal crime, that the world outside learned of the unspeakable horror that had occurred inside the cabin. The air was thick with the scent of decay when authorities forced their way in, alerted by neighbors who had grown suspicious of the silence. Inside, the scene was nightmarish. The bodies of Cassandra and Ben remained where they had fallen, their skeletal remains bearing testament to the brutality of their deaths. But it was the remains of the children, frail and small, curled together as though in sleep, that brought seasoned investigators to the brink of tears. The horror of their slow demise was almost too much to bear. Whoever had done this had not only murdered but had left 2 innocent souls to suffer in the most inhumane way possible. The community of Torreon was rocked by the murders. It was the kind of place where crime was rare, where neighbors trusted one another, where doors were left unlocked at night. The idea that someone from their own town might have committed such a heinous act was almost unthinkable. Detectives began piecing together the evidence. Who would want Cassandra and Ben dead? Was it a robbery gone wrong? A crime of passion? A message sent? They spoke to friends, family, anyone who might have known something. But in a place where people valued their privacy, answers were scarce. Fear crept through the town like a cold wind, whispering suspicions but offering no solid proof. Then the break came. Months of painstaking investigation led authorities to 4 men, locals with a history of trouble. They had boasted about their crime in whispers, drunk on their own cruelty. But the true mastermind, the one who had pulled the trigger that fateful night, was Lawrence Nieto. Nieto was no stranger to violence. He had a reputation, one built on intimidation and recklessness. But what could have driven him to commit such an unspeakable act? Theories swirled. Was it a debt unpaid, a vendetta, or simply a display of power? Whatever the reason, the evidence was undeniable. Witnesses came forward, the walls of silence cracked, and the truth was laid bare. In the end, Nieto was sentenced to 39 years in prison. His accomplices faced their own sentences, but for many, the punishment felt inadequate. No amount of prison time could bring Cassandra, Ben, or the innocent children back. The Torreon Cabin Murders remain one of the most chilling cases in New Mexico's history. The tragedy of two young lovers, gunned down in the dark, and two innocent children left to perish in solitude still echoes through the town, a ghostly reminder of the cruelty humans are capable of. Today, the cabin stands empty, abandoned to the elements. Some say they can still hear faint cries in the wind, whispers of the past refusing to be silenced. A haunting reminder that some nightmares never truly end.
In the summer of 1968, the Robison family, a seemingly happy, well-to-do group from metropolitan Detroit, escaped to their beloved cabin in Goodhart, Michigan. Nestled in the dense woods along the pristine shores of Lake Michigan, the small log retreat had been a sanctuary for Richard Robison, his wife Shirley, and their 4 children, Richie, 19, Gary, 16, Randall, 12, and Susan, just 7 years old. It was meant to be a quiet escape from the chaos of city life, a place where the family could relax, unwind, and enjoy the serene beauty of northern Michigan. But what should have been a peaceful vacation became one of the most gruesome mass murders in Michigan history. The family was last seen alive on the evening of June 25, 1968. Richard, a successful businessman who owned an advertising and magazine distribution firm, had been working on business paperwork from the cabin while the rest of the family enjoyed their time in the sun. No one in Goodhart suspected that, just hours after they disappeared from sight, an unimaginable horror would unfold behind the rustic wooden walls of their cabin. For nearly a month, the cabin sat undisturbed, its exterior betraying no signs of the horrors inside. Neighbors assumed the family had simply returned home early. Letters went unanswered, but no one thought much of it. The isolated location meant that the Robisons weren't expected to check in frequently. Then, on July 22nd to 27th, days after the family was last seen, a foul odor began wafting from the cabin, strong enough to alarm nearby vacationers. It was a stench that could only mean one thing: death. A caretaker, growing concerned, finally unlocked the door. What he found inside would haunt the small town of Goodhart forever. The inside of the cabin was like a scene from a horror film. The entire Robison family lay dead, their bodies in advanced decomposition. The smell of decay was overwhelming, thick in the humid summer air. Blood spattered the walls and floors, though it had dried long ago. The grotesque state of the remains made it difficult to determine exactly what had happened, but one thing was clear: this was no accident. The crime scene was brutal. Someone had fired a gun through the window, striking Richard Robison first. The attacker then entered the cabin, executing each member of the family with chilling precision. Shirley, Richie, Gary, Randall, and little Susan were shot at close range, their lives snuffed out before they had a chance to escape. Some of the bodies appeared to have been rearranged after death, and in a twisted attempt to mislead investigators, the killer staged the scene to suggest a sexual assault motive. But the truth was far darker than a random attack. Police swarmed the crime scene, combing through the wreckage of the Robisons' final moments. The brutality of the massacre was shocking, even for seasoned investigators. The placement of the bodies, the methodical nature of the executions, this wasn't the work of an impulsive killer. This was personal. The community of Goodhart was gripped by fear. The thought of a murderer lurking in their quiet vacation town sent shockwaves through the locals. People locked their doors, something they had rarely done before. Who could have committed such an atrocity? And why? As investigators dug into Richard Robeson's life, they uncovered more than just business dealings and family vacations. Behind the facade of a successful businessman, Robeson had enemies, some of whom had plenty of reasons to see him dead. His company had been experiencing financial troubles. Rumors swirled of mismanaged funds, possible embezzlement, and business betrayals. Robeson had recently discovered irregularities in his company's finances, missing funds that couldn't be explained. The police turned their focus to a man who had been close to Robeson, Joseph Raymond Scolaro III, a former business associate and the self-proclaimed future heir of the company. He had worked for Robeson as a salesman, but their relationship had soured in recent months. Scolaro had motive. He had means. But did he have the nerve to execute an entire family in cold blood? The deeper the police looked into Scolaro, the more their suspicions grew. Forensic evidence placed a gun similar to Scolaro's at the crime scene. The ammunition matched the type he owned. And most damning of all, financial records showed that Scolaro had been embezzling money from Robeson's company, tens of thousands of dollars. Robeson had planned to confront him, possibly even press charges. But was this enough to drive a man to mass murder? When confronted, Scolaro denied everything. His alibi was shaky, and his behavior erratic. The evidence against him was circumstantial but compelling. Yet, for all the suspicions, there was one glaring problem: the police never had enough to make an arrest. For years, the case remained open but unsolved. Scolaro walked free, but the weight of suspicion followed him wherever he went. Then, in 1973, before charges could ever be filed, Scolaro died by suicide. In his final note, he left behind a cryptic message, neither a confession nor a denial. The truth, it seemed, had died with him. To this day, the Goodhart murders remain one of Michigan's most disturbing unsolved cases. While the evidence strongly pointed to Scolaro, there was never a definitive conclusion. Some believe he was the killer. Others suggest he was merely a pawn in a deeper conspiracy. What truly happened in that cabin on June 25, 1968? Did Joseph Scolaro act alone? Or was there more to the story than anyone ever uncovered? Perhaps the truth still lingers, buried beneath decades of whispers, waiting for someone to finally bring it to light.
The stench was unbearable. Detectives stepped inside the modest home in Great Baddow, Essex, holding their breath against the suffocating rot that clung to the walls. Dusty furniture, faded photographs, and untouched trinkets lined the shelves, remnants of a life that had long since decayed. As they moved deeper into the house, their flashlights landed on something strange. A pile of masonry blocks, oddly placed in what should have been a cozy study. One officer reached out, his fingers trembling as he pulled back the blanket draped over it. Silence. Then, the sharp inhale of breath. Inside the crude tomb was the mummified body of an elderly man. Upstairs, another discovery, his wife, zipped inside a sleeping bag, hidden in a wardrobe. For 4 years, their daughter had lived with their corpses, and no one had known. John and Lois McCullough were well known in their neighborhood. He had been a respected university lecturer. She, a kind-hearted woman, always willing to lend a hand. Their daughter, Virginia, still lived at home well into her 30s, a quiet but seemingly normal presence. Then, in the summer of 2019, the McCulloughs vanished. At first, no one questioned it. Virginia explained it away with ease. Her parents were traveling. They had fallen ill and were recovering in private. They simply weren't up for visitors. Months turned into years. Emails still arrived from John's account. Bills were paid. Their pension checks continued to be withdrawn. Everything seemed fine, until a doctor noticed that John hadn't collected his medication in over 4 years. A welfare check was ordered, and when Virginia opened the door, smiling as if nothing were wrong, police had no idea they were stepping into a house of death. When officers first asked about her parents, Virginia remained composed. "They're away," she said, her voice even. They don't like using the phone. There was no immediate cause for alarm. The house was tidy, quiet, normal. But something fell off. Authorities pushed further. When was the last time she had spoken to them? Could she prove where they were? Virginia hesitated. A flicker of something crossed her face. Then she sighed. I suppose it's time I told the truth. Detectives braced themselves. But what she said next made their blood run cold. My parents never left, she whispered. The truth was worse than anyone had imagined. In 2019, Virginia had poisoned her father's drink, watching as he slipped into unconsciousness, never to wake again. The next morning, when her mother became suspicious, Virginia grabbed a hammer. 1, 2, 3 blows, followed by a knife. It was over in minutes. Then came the real horror, the cover-up. Virginia had built a tomb for her father, wrapping his body and placing him in the study. Her mother's corpse, less fortunate, had been stuffed inside a sleeping bag and hidden in a wardrobe upstairs. For 4 years, she had lived with them, slept in the same house, cooked meals, watched TV, celebrated holidays, while their remains rotted in the very rooms they once inhabited. Virginia didn't just hide their bodies, she became them. She forged emails from their accounts, responding to family members as if nothing had changed. She withdrew their pensions, used their money, and meticulously covered her tracks. When people asked about them, she answered with ease, spinning lie after lie with unnerving calm. Even when police first arrived, she almost convinced them. But time had betrayed her, and now the truth was laid bare. The courtroom was silent when Virginia received her sentence, life in prison, with a minimum of 36 years. Even then, she remained emotionless, her expression unreadable. Why had she done it? For money? For control? Or was the answer even darker than anyone dared to believe? Virginia McCullough wasn't the first to kill those closest to her. She wasn't even the first to live among the dead. But her story leaves a chilling question. How many others are out there, hiding the truth behind closed doors? Because in this case, the most horrifying part wasn't just the murders. It was how easily she got away with it. For years, and no one suspected a thing.